Hello, everybody. I'm Justin.
And I'm Nick.
And we are Fans Football in the Zone. So now that Week 16 and your fantasy championship is almost here, hopefully you made it. And if you did, we wish you best of luck.
Best of luck to you.
If you did make it, we're here to help you as much as we can. And that's why we're going to bring you our starts and sits.
And
start off with the quarterback. Nick.
My two-star quarterbacks this week are Colin Kaepernick and Ben Roethlisberger. I want to talk about Colin Kaepernick in specific. Even though they both have great matchups, he has an even better one with the Falcons, because the Falcons been bad all year. You start all your guys going up against the Falcons that week.
My star quarterbacks are Jay Cutler versus the Eagles and Kirk Cousins versus Dallas. The thing with Kirk Cousins is they're going to pass as much as they can because they're trying to prove that he could be a franchise quarterback somewhere else. And they're trying to get their first round pick back that they don't have this season. And I think they're going to pass the ball as much as they're going to keep on passing. And I think he could have at least like 20 points versus an atrocious defense in Dallas. They let Matt Flynn throw for 4 touchdowns in the second half alone. And Jay Cutler versus Philly, you saw what Matt Castle did against the Eagles.
My 6 QBs are Andrew Luck, who has a bad matchup against the Chiefs and been inconsistent, and Eli Manning versus the Lions. The Lions aren't that good defensively, but Eli Manning, you can't trust him, especially in your fantasy championship.
My 6 quarterbacks are Matt Ryan versus the 49ers and Matt Castle. I think Matt Castle last week just had a good matchup, and I just think it was a fluke, and I don't think it will carry over, and I don't think you could trust him this week. And I don't like Matt Ryan versus San Francisco. He's been too inconsistent and a tough matchup, and I think if there's somebody like Jay Cutler on the waiver wire or somebody like Ryan Tannehill, I think you could trust him more than Matt Ryan this week.
Let's move on to the start running backs. My start running backs are Bobby Rainey versus the Rams, which is a good matchup, and Dennis Johnson versus the Broncos, which is a great matchup. Dennis Johnson's now the number 1 with injuries to Foster and Ben Tate, both being placed on IR. I think he could have a 13 to 15 point day in PPR leagues.
My start running backs are Alfred Morris versus Dallas. Alfred Morris, he's been pretty solid, but not solid enough for a first-round pick. And I think he just has a great matchup versus Dallas, and I think he could do something that you haven't seen him do all year. And Dallas, like we said, been atrocious. And DeMarco Murray versus Washington. Washington hasn't been able to stop running backs either.
Let's move on to sit running backs. My sit running backs are Donald Brown with the bad matchup versus the Chiefs, and Andre Ellington versus the Seahawks. Andre Ellington been not very good as of late, and he has a really bad matchup with the Seahawks. Stay away from him in your fantasy
My sit running backs are Andre Brown versus the Lions and Steven Jackson versus the 49ers. Andre Brown, you probably can't sit him, but I think he's not going to have a big day against the front 4, the Detroit Lions, with Sue, Ansah, Fairley. These guys have been beasts, and running backs just have a tough time getting to the second wave against these guys. And Andre Brown, you probably can't sit him, but don't have high expectations for him. And Steven Jackson, I know he's been hot, but he's been consistent. He's been consistent, but he's been hot the last few weeks, and I think he'll have a bad week this week against the 49ers.
Let's move on to the start of my receivers. My start of my receivers, Kendall Wright, coming off a huge game versus Jacksonville, and Andre Johnson versus the Broncos. You were probably starting Andre Johnson anyway, but he hasn't been very good as of late, and he has a very, very good matchup with the Broncos.
My start wide receivers are Pierre Garçon versus Dallas. I keep on targeting Dallas. It's just their defense has been atrocious. So many injuries, and they can't stop anybody, whether it's the quarterback, running back, wide receiver. Yeah. Start them all. They all get fantasy points. I love everybody on the offense that's playing Dallas. I think Pierre Garçon, he's been very good all season, and Kirk Cousins is going to throw him the ball a lot. And Keenan Allen versus Oakland, one of the best waiver wire pickups on this year. And I think Keenan Allen could at least score 15 to 20 points for you against Oakland in your fantasy championship.
Don't worry about targeting the Cowboys. I target against the Giants every week. Let's move on to the sit on wide receivers.
No, you target Jacksonville.
Yeah. My sit wide receivers are Larry Fitzgerald and Greg Jennings. Larry Fitzgerald has been consistent as of late, but has a nightmare matchup with Seattle. And Greg Jennings, he had a great game last week, but overall he's been inconsistent as can be. You can't trust him in your fantasy championship, and the Bengals are above average pass defense.
My sit wide receivers are Steve Smith versus New Orleans and Akeem Nicks versus Detroit. Steve Smith's been so inconsistent, and New Orleans have been pretty good defensively against the pass. And Hakeem Nicks versus Detroit. Hakeem Nicks, I know his value goes up a little bit with the loss of Victor Cruz, but I think Hakeem Nicks, you can trust him, especially in the championship. You couldn't trust him all year, and he hasn't. You don't have one touchdown on the year, and that's a problem for me to trust.
Let's move on to the stardom tight ends. My stardom tight ends are Charles Clay, who've been extremely hot going up against Buffalo, and Zach Miller going up against the Cardinals. Zach Miller hasn't done much all year, but the Cardinals are awful against defending tight ends. I think he'll have a big day.
My star tight ends are Dennis Pitta versus New England and Zach Ertz versus Chicago. Zach Ertz, ever since Brian Urlacher retired and Lance Briggs got hurt, they really can't stop running backs or tight ends with the linebackers. And I think Zach Ertz, Nick Foles loves him in the red zone. He's been getting a lot of touchdowns in the last few weeks, and I think you could trust Zach Ertz if you don't have an elite tight end. And Dennis Pitta, we were pretty high on him last week, but he really didn't do well, but I think he could do a lot better in New England. I think he could be a top 5 tight end, possibly, definitely top 10, because New England can't really stop anybody, or stop tight ends,
Let's move on to sit-em tight ends. My sit-em tight ends are Colby Fleener going up against the Chiefs and Greg Olsen versus the Saints. Greg Olsen been pretty good as of late, but he has a really bad matchup with the Saints, because last time he played the Saints, he didn't do very well.
My tight ends are Heath Miller versus Green Bay and Jared Cook versus Tampa Bay. Jared Cook has been too inconsistent, pretty tough matchup versus Tampa Bay, and Heath Miller versus Green Bay. Heath Miller's also so inconsistent, and when you hear Green Bay, their defense comes to mind as not so good, but the last few weeks they've been stopping tight ends pretty well.
Let's move on to our sleeper defenses. My sleeper defense is the Bengals going up against the Vikings. Even though the Vikings scored 45 last week without Adrian Peterson, overall as this season they haven't been very good against offenses.
My sleeper defense is the Lions. First thing you have to think about is when the Lions defense is versing Eli Manning. Eli Manning's been throwing so many picks and so many turnovers, and turnovers equal fantasy points. That's the only thing you have to worry about in the Lions defense, and I think they could be a pretty nice pickup for you. And that will conclude the show. Follow us on Twitter at FfInTheZone. Ask us as many questions you want, and they will get answered. Like this video, leave a comment.
And
Comments
subscribe.
make us happy. We read all of them, and thank you.
And subscribe.